Welcome back to the Patchwork Revival podcast. I'm Emily. Thank you for being here. Um, Today's episode is the start of a conversation that I have been wanting to have for a long time, but I haven't really found the chance to just sit and talk about it. So, after years and years of quilting, searching the internet for quilting inspiration, tutorials, tips, tricks, I think it's time to start a conversation about what do we actually need to successfully make a quilt. Hey y'all, I'm Emily, an almost lifelong quilter with a lot of stories to tell. I have loved quilts and talking about them for as long as I can remember, and I'm here to celebrate the tradition of quilting with you. From family heirlooms to thrift store finds, every quilt holds a piece of history and a little piece of a quilter's heart. Join me every other week to get back to your quilting roots. We'll celebrate quilts and the real people who made them, learn a little bit about the history of quilting, and have lots of fun exploring ways to reclaim tradition in a modern world. I'm so glad you're joining me this week here at Patchwork Revival. Now, maybe you've never made a quilt before, you're a total beginner, you're looking for advice and tips on I have nothing, I want a piece of quilt top together. What do I actually need? If I go to the store, what do I need to buy? This episode is going to help you. I also want this episode to be something that speaks to quilters who have been quilting for a really long time. Over years, we accumulate so much stuff, and it's not even always stuff that we need. I have moved a couple of times in the last several years, and I have found that having a little bit less has actually helped me sort of become more efficient and just kind of taken away some elements of the paralysis that can come with having way too many ways to do something. So I'm a little bit of a notion minimalist, but I think that it has served my creative process really well. So I want to open up this conversation about what do I actually think we need? What do I recommend to people who are just starting on their quilting journey? Of course, this is a community effort. This podcast is meant to be a community-focused endeavor. It's why I started the podcast. So I would love to hear from you. What are your favorite notions? What do you wish you would have had before you started quilting? If you could tell yourself one thing to get or one thing to just not worry about from the get-go, what would that thing be? So just to be clear, this is not an episode where I'm going to give you a checklist of things to go buy from my store or links to my Amazon shop. I've just been kind of going through, like I said, a mindset shift over the last several years where I've just recognized that having more things is not really the answer to anything. Okay. I really have truly experienced just a new level of fulfillment and even sort of creative burst just by simply focusing on what I have, using what I have, and making things work. So this episode is going to be about understanding the basics and just being empowered as a quilter to start where you are, to be comfortable where you are, to recognize that you are not going to be able to buy yourself into enjoying making a quilt or perfection making a quilt. Just enjoy where you are, enjoy the process. And here are some basic tools to do it. This episode is kind of going to be a kickoff of just a loose series that I will be weaving in throughout this year, all focused on helping support quilters who are just getting started, or maybe they just still feel unsure, to just learn foundations, to feel confident enough to try new things. I feel like I've made plenty of mistakes and I have learned a lot from my mistakes and I'm ready to pass them forward. And I know that we have a lot of experienced listeners as well. So I would love for you to be part of this too. If there's a tool, a habit, a mindset shift that you wish you had known earlier, send it my way. I want to include your wisdom in future episodes. You can send an email to hello@patchworkrevivalstudios.com. Let me know what's on your mind. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to leave it in the comments so that we can all join in the conversation. that's a really good reminder that I am posting video of the podcast episodes on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Patchwork Revival Studios. So you can watch sort of visual um, representation of the videos on YouTube. It's a little bit cumbersome for me to film episodes, but I felt like it was important because quilting is such a visual art form. I mean, clearly. And I wanted to be able to sort of show things and props and notions and quilts and designs whenever I can. So they're going to be on YouTube. You can check it out there. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Write a review if you would. I would be so appreciative. That's how the internet knows that this is a decent podcast to share with people. So that would mean a lot to me. Thank you. Let's jump in. What do you need to make a quilt? And how do you keep yourself from going broke trying to gather the supplies that you need? So I recently watched a video by Adam Savage. He's the Mythbusters guy, the redhead guy, not the one with the big walrusy mustache. That's Jamie, I think. I used to watch Mythbusters a lot. I really loved that show, but Adam Savage is a really, really neat guy. And he had this great concept. And it went like this. Listen, you need tools to do certain things. Like you can't just rip fabric with your bare hands. You need tools. You need supplies. Okay. That's fair. But if you can't afford the best, most durable tool out there, just buy what you can afford and start there. And if you use that cheap thing so much that it breaks, then you'll know it's time to go upgrade to the best thing you can. But you don't necessarily have to start out from the get-go with like top of the line, all the things you could possibly need. So I just want to point that out. Okay. None of this is meant to make you feel like you don't have enough or that you can't just get started by going to a local big box store. Honestly, all of the things we're talking about today, if you walked into a kind of regular Walmart, you could probably, as long as they had the crafting section, you could probably find all this stuff and get started. I do have an episode 3 of this podcast was back in the day with my friend Bree, who is amazing at finding really cool, affordable things at thrift stores and secondhand. She has her best advice there. So I highly recommend listening to that because I think it's a really fun conversation and I think it's important. So tips on affordable quilting supplies, notions, go pop over there to episode 3. There's a little bit more in-depth wisdom there on that topic. So let's dive in. What do we need to make a quilt? First, you need space. No way around it. You need space to sew. And I don't mean this big, gigantic, dedicated sewing room with windows streaming in natural light that's just worthy of a magazine photo or an Instagram photo. I just mean space. Think about a large, flat surface, your kitchen table, maybe a kitchen island, maybe your floor. I honestly can tell you, trying to cut fabric, to lay out designs in an organized way is just so much easier with an actual dedicated space rather than trying to squeeze yourself into some tiny little nook on your computer desk. So I've used a kitchen table, I've used my floor, I've even laid block designs out on my bed just because I didn't have a design wall at the time. Think about what space you have and just how you can use it for your quilting project, even if it's temporary. My mama kept her cutting mat on her chest freezer, so just make it work. And I think this is the biggest thing. Just start where you are. This is where you've just got to dive in. Get off the socials. Stop looking at the setup of these professional quilt artists and quilt bloggers. I mean, I'm so jealous of them, honestly. Look at this. This is my YouTube studio. It is a dark corner of a guest bedroom. There's a fold-out sofa over there. I mean, I'm doing the best I can. But I'm starting where I am, walking the walk, folks. So it's fine to be working on your kitchen table late at night as long as you're enjoying yourself. Speaking of cutting fabric, let's talk cutting supplies. So I'm going to come back to other things like the actual materials you need to make a quilt. Today, we're just talking about the tools that you're going to need to work with those materials. The materials are just a whole bigger conversation, but when it comes to cutting fabric, you're going to need a rotary cutter system. So that means you're going to need a rotary cutter mat. You cannot use a rotary cutter without a mat. You will destroy lots of things. I can't even imagine that. So you need a rotary cutting mat, you need a rotary cutter, and you need an acrylic ruler, like an acrylic rotary cutter ruler. These are things that come in various sizes at various price points. So over the years, I have actually accumulated multiple sizes of each. And it's basically because I started with the tiniest things because that was the cheapest thing at the time. But I have found that I thrive on a little bit of a larger cutting mat, and now I never use my small ones, so those were actually a total waste of money. Like, I might as well have just flushed that money down the toilet because I don't use those anymore. So I found a larger cutting mat works well for me, and I'll explain why. I also like a 45 millimeter rotary cutter, and then I have an 8x14 ruler that I use for basically all of my projects. So we'll walk through that. When it comes to choosing a cutting mat in a ruler size, you've got to note that most quilt projects and patterns that you purchase are going to have cutting instructions that are instructing you how to cut the pieces that are required for the project out of a fat quarter, a fat eighth, some sort of pre-cut fabric of a certain size, or with the fabric. So a width of fabric of a traditional quilting cotton is going to be 42 to 44 inches. Kind of depends. But the easiest way to cut that is with the bolts, the width of fabric folded in half. That's how it's wound on the bolt. So you have 45 inches of fabric folded in half, and then that is doubled piece is what's wound around into a bolt of fabric. So your yardage is going to be a width of fabric folded in half, like sandwiched. So 42 inches, let's say 44 inches divided by 2 is 22 inches. So it's really, really nice to have a cutting mat situation where you can lay that out, where you can actually see that. So I would suggest that you have, at the very least, a minimum of one side of your cutting mat being at least 22 inches. So the cutting mat that you can actually see on my desk here on video is 24 by 18 inches. And this is really nice. And I'll tell you why. Because a fat quarter is probably the biggest pre-cut that you can get, and it is 18 by 21 inches. So if you have an 18 by 24 inch cutting mat, you actually can lay your fat quarters out flat here, okay, and be able to cut them according to a diagram, for example, without having to do this mental gymnastics on, okay, I need to cut a 22-inch piece here, but I've only got this 12 by 12 mat. So how do I need to fold this so that I can cut it? This is just going to take a lot of that headache away. I actually like a 36 by 24 mat. I have one of those and it's great. It's my favorite. It's my go-to. I usually just have it out and on my table, and then I'll have my stuff on top of it as I need to. I usually just kind of use it as a tabletop thing, but having a mat that is large enough for you to square up and straighten a folded width of fabric is going to be really convenient. It's only going to help you with accuracy of your cutting. So to span that cut, so a full half of a width of fabric, let's say 22 inches, you're going to need like a 24-inch ruler to span that distance. Now, I don't love that. I'm short. I'm 5'3". So I actually tend to fold my width of fabric that's folded in half again. So I'm cutting 4 layers at a time, but that way I have much more control over how far I have to make a cut. So that's why my 9-inch by 14-inch ruler is really nice. I will say this is a ruler that I first started cutting with. I just made it work, and I've made it work ever since then, and I really like it. I have used a longer ruler before, like a 24 by 6-inch ruler that I have, and, I have trouble with it because I have to reach so far that a lot of times the further I am from my body, that ruler kind of wiggles, kind of wags, and so I'll get some kind of wonky cuts every so often. So that's not my favorite actually, even though it seems easiest. I like my little 9-inch by 14-inch ruler. Um, this thing is nicked and has tape on it and all kinds of stuff. It's marked up, but I use it a lot. I like it a lot. I recommend it. So think about that. But it's okay. You might have to try a couple ones to really figure out what you like. And it may also depend on, maybe you really like strip piecing and maybe you have a great setup where you can use a long ruler and fully reach across the edge of your table. That's great too. Um, Always think about safety. A lot of people have these like suction, like shower handle looking things on their rulers. Those are great. You can cut a finger clean off with a rotary cutter. So it's really important to have a handle or like a cutting glove, some kind of non-slip feature on your ruler. Some rulers come with kind of tacky or grippy things on the bottom to help them keep from slipping. Some come with the handle. You can buy the handles to sort of retroactively fit them to the ruler. Just think about that too, okay? When it comes to your actual rotary cutter, there's, for, all intents and purposes, about 3 sizes: tiny, medium, large. Medium is this normal size. It's like a 45 millimeter rotary cutter. I have a Olfa. It's really simple. You just pull this back, blade is exposed, cut, put the blade back on for a safety. There's always a safety on these things. Some are like a grip, where the grip you have to push something and then that exposes the blade. I have a hard time with those because I'm ambidextrous. I cut with both hands. So that just makes it a little more cumbersome for me. I have found what I like. I used to think these bigger 60 millimeter rotary cutters were the way to go. I don't know. Bigger just seemed better to me. But I actually found that it didn't make that big of a difference for me. And 45 millimeter blades were just easier for me to find. They were in stock more frequently. This tiny little guy, I got this from Walmart actually. And I use it for curves when I'm cutting curves. I do like having a small rotary cutter around for cutting curves. But this is not something I got until I was way into my quilting journey and I had the guts to try curves even. I mean, that was forever. It took me a long time to get there. So I would say start off, just get you a 45 millimeter rotary cutter. Always remember safety when it comes to rotary cutters. I just cannot say that enough. I do prefer the simple cutter because I like to cut with my right hand to straighten things up. And then I switch to my left hand just to crank out different like strips with my ruler and stuff. So I like a simple one. They make them with much more complicated and much fancier safety mechanisms, which might be important if you are one of those people who has, little kids, animals roaming around. You just need to be really careful. They do also make ergonomic rotary cutters with handles. They might be important depending on your physical needs, or something you could consider as an upgrade eventually. I know one of my friends, Rachel, uses an ergonomic rotary cutter that she says has made a huge difference for her. She just loves it. So something to think about. But a lot of places like Walmart, for example, will sell sets of like a mat, a ruler, and a rotary cutter. It's a great way to just get it all at once. But before you buy it, think about, can you afford a bigger mat that is big enough where you can at least do a width of fabric cut on that? So at least 24 inches somewhere, some kind of dimension. That's it. What we actually think a lot about when we think about cutting things are scissors. Do we need scissors? Kind of. Yeah, you need scissors. But what I actually use a lot when I'm quilting are snips, like little tiny snippy snippers. Embroidery scissors are something that you could use. A lot of people have those sitting around. You can find those pretty easily at thrift stores or estate sales or things like that for pretty cheap. And scissors are something you can spend a lot of money on. So you might want to think about what you need before you go buy them. Really, what you need is a small set of snips or even just small scissors, like I said, for cross stitch, embroidery, things like that. You're really just going to have to cut thread with them. Larger shears, I would say at first are optional. I think this is kind of a personal preference though, because I personally really, really like the tactile feedback and process of cutting, like snipping little dog ears off half square triangles. When I make multiple half square triangles at a time or flying geese, I'll actually cut that 1/4 inch seam allowance with scissors because I can estimate it and it's okay. So I think it's a personal thing, but it's really not something you necessarily need. So I have a pair of really nice 8-inch shears. So the blade is like an 8-inch blade on my scissors. And you really just need one pair. You don't need any fancy like pinking shears or anything like that. Of course, if you have those, great. I mean, just use what you have. So now you have a plan for cutting your fabric. So now, how do you sew the pieces back together? The couple things you're going to need. First thing you're going to need are pins. Just buy some. There's always somebody on the internet that has some affiliate link for some fancy pins. If you're picky, I guess go ahead. But I just got some pins. I've had the same pins in my messy pin cushion for decades. This is what my pin cushion looks like. It's wool and it's full of gunk and junk. So I have safety pins because that's what I use for basting. And those are my big kahunas that I use for some parts of basting. And then all in here are these little thin pins. I like kind of a fine pin because then you're not going to get a big old hole in your fabric. But again, if you buy a kit of like, say, scissors, a pin cushion, it'll have some pins in it. Those are probably fine to get started. Some people like clips. I don't know. They're a bigger investment. I would wait to see how it goes. But maybe those are just easier for your hands to use or something like that. Always the valid thing to just think about what you actually need, what will work for you. The next thing you're going to need for quilting before you sew a single seam is an iron. Just use what you have. Get you an iron. There's always fancy irons out there, and I would love a Laura Star, thing, but I don't have room for that. I don't have money for that right now. So I just use an old Rowenta iron, my regular ironing board, the same thing I would use if I was ironing a dress or shirt or whatever. One thing I will say, my iron at this point is we really don't iron that many clothes anymore. My iron is my quilting iron. I do not use water in it, no steam. I never use steam. And the reason that's important is because I don't want gunk or residue or like scale building up in the holes that will come out onto my iron plate and smudge and smear all over my fabric. I've had that happen before. It's very sad. Just have an iron and say, let's not put water in this. Okay. We don't have to iron clothes as much anymore. Anyways, there's all these technical fabrics where they're like ready to wear, fresh out of the dryer, which is great. I love those. But I do use starch. Personally, I use starch. Everybody has very strong opinions on this to get started. I would just say use a little regular spray starch, like aerosol faultless or whatever, Niagara, whatever you have lying around. It's great. Just start there. You can always get the fancy stuff later when you figure out how much you love making quilts. When I make a quilt by piecing it on a sewing machine. Machine piece quilting. That's pretty much, I would say, probably the most common way we make a quilt. Your machine is a deeply personal decision. I don't have great insight into this, okay? because everybody is going to have their own criteria based on their budget, features you want. Like, do you want to be able to actually free motion quilt and quilt your own quilts? Do you want an embroidery? Do you want a multi-purpose machine? Do you want an antique like Singer featherweight machine? Does it need to be transportable? Do you want to have it inset into a table? This is one thing I would recommend: purchasing something as fancy as you can. Consider buying it brand new from a trusted dealer. That way you will have technical support, warranties, repair readily available, that sort of stuff. But you can get a couple $100 in a machine and make a quilt easily. Maybe not easily, but just because you have a more expensive machine, what I'm saying, like a $10,000 machine, does not make quilting any easier necessarily than like a $1,000 machine or a $500 machine. Everybody's going to be different. My machine, I love it because it has a really large throat space, which means I have more room between the edge of the machine on the far right and the needle, so that I can pile up my quilt and my extra fabric in there. And that's important for me because I like to free motion quilt and just do walking foot quilting on my own projects a lot of the time. So I wanted a machine that made that accessible to me, and that was why I splurged on the machine that I have now. I bought her when I was a resident, so I was very poor, and I did all I could to afford this machine, and I still have it. It's been many, many years now, so no regrets buying that machine. I think if I had bought one that didn't have that feature just to save some money, I think I would have regretted it, and I probably already would have bought another one. So you have to kind of think of this one as a long-term investment. So buy what you can, though. Off the shelf at a big box store, totally fine. I would just make sure that you have a patchwork foot, which means like a 1/4 inch foot or a patchwork foot that has a guide for a 1/4 inch seam, because that is important for basically, I don't know, almost every quilt pattern you're ever going to make. You could also buy magnetic seam guides. So there's like a little magnet that sits on your machine plate. And you can position that to help get your good 1/4 inch seam as well. So that's also an option. At the time you buy your machine, you may also want to try to think about getting a walking foot for your sewing machine. A walking foot is required if you want to quilt your own quilts with walking foot, like straight lines, some organic curvy lines, a crosshatch. Walking foot is what you're going to need to get that done. I also made sure my machine had a seam guide bar. I really like having that. A lot of machines come with that, but it's nice to have. So I would just make sure when you're buying all your things to get started, those are some things to think about to see if your machine has, or maybe you could go ahead and buy as an accessory, because you have to buy all of those things to be compatible with your specific machine. So if you buy them all at once from your, local shop or dealer, you'll know it fits, and that'll be really convenient. It's time to use it. When it comes to a needle, for your sewing machine at first, just use what's on there. It's going to be fine for a quilt. It took me years to change my first sewing machine needle because I was terrified. I didn't really know how important it was. I didn't know what kind to buy to replace it. This is where having a trusted shop kind of comes in handy. But a Microtex needle is going to fit most uses that you're going to have with quilting cotton. It's what I like to use. I recommend it. But those are just a type. So you can go anywhere or Google Microtex sewing machine needle and you'll be able to find it. But I just used the needle that was on my sewing machine actually literally for years before I changed it. And it was okay. Probably not ideal, but it worked. So don't get too caught up in that. When it comes to hand stitching or hand quilting with thread, I like John James needles. They're in betweens. They're from Colonial Needle Company. You can also just go to your big box store and look for needles. But you want one that has a big enough eye that you can thread it, but you don't need necessarily a gigantic embroidery needle for like a small 50 weight thread, for example. You don't have to get too fancy. I use the same needles I've had for forever, and I just love those things. So when it comes to thread, I use different things depending on what I'm doing. So at first I used to only use 100% cotton thread. I have a big cone of it here, and I bought this big cone because it was just more economically, it just made more sense. It was just cheaper for the amount that I was getting. And it was 100% cotton, which this is a thread that I've used for forever. Do you want 100% cotton? Do you want a poly thread? Do you want to use the same thread? What weight of thread do you want? You can really go down a rabbit hole here. I found I like piecing with a cotton thread. And most places are going to have a cotton thread or a cotton poly blend. Poly thread is going to be a little bit stronger. But if you're really into organic stuff, maybe you want a cotton thread. Just decide on that and then see what they've got. Or what you could do is just buy 2 spools of it, and don't buy a big cone at first. Just see what you like. Buy a regular size spool, see what you like. And you may just buy 2 of different types. Buy a poly, buy a cotton. This is hardly the most expensive thing that you're going to buy when you're starting to make a quilt. So if you can, just spend a couple bucks, get an extra spool, get 2 different kinds, cotton and poly. See what your machine likes best for your purposes. Because I found that my machine a lot of times does a little better with a poly thread when I'm actually doing the free motion quilting. But all the other stuff, it does great with a cotton thread. And that's kind of my preference. So I don't know. It just depends. But those are good ways to start. And I recommend getting both at first. That way, if you're getting frustrated because your machine, something's just not going right, you can just switch it out, see if that helps fix the problem. Maybe it will. So now that you've pieced a quilt, you're ready to quilt it. You have to make a decision now. Do you want to do it yourself, or do you want to hire somebody else to do it? If you do it yourself, are you going to do it by hand, or are you going to do it on your domestic machine? I'm assuming you don't have a long arm. If you quilt it yourself, okay, you're going to have to baste the quilt top. So baste the quilt top, batting, and the quilt backing all together. Some people do this with thread. I like thread basting, actually. It's very nice. It's very efficient. It's very easy to remove, cheap. You can use basting pins. Those are like curved safety pins. That's just an extra expense that you're going to incur. And then you're going to have to be able to store those pins. I have a huge box of them. I use them a lot. But then I do have a big box of pins that I have to store and worry about my puppy dog or my kid getting into them and like poking themselves or just dropping in. It's a mess. There is spray based also. You can buy spray based, which is a like aerosol adhesive. There's a way you can make your own spray basting with starch. I think like cornstarch maybe. I've never tried it before. I've always wanted to, but I just use Elmer's glue. It's washable. It's cheap. Sometimes it really leaves little hard spots, but if you kind of get your technique down where you really string it out pretty good, it's easy. It dries quickly. It washes out easily. So I do use Elmer's glue to baste quilts. I do all different kinds of stuff, but we've already talked about this. You're going to need a walking foot for your machine, and then a seam guide bar is really helpful because then you can just basically mark one line on your quilt top and quilt that. Like that needs to be your true line. So it could be a seam line that's straight and true, and then you can set your seam bar for, I don't know, say an inch or 2-inch gap, and then just follow that true line all the way down and be able to just quilt with straight line quilting on your quilt top, and you'll be done if you just sit and do line after line after line after line. This is where you may want to have a couple threads available to try, but your machine, it's going to tell you what it likes and you'll figure it out. Just listen to what it has to say to you. It can also be very frustrating, but she'll tell you what she needs, folks. It's also totally valid. Send your quilt to a long armor. Just send it off. let somebody work their magic. Long armors are wizards. I am always just in awe of the work that they do. So have a plan, but know that you have options, and just know that getting started, your expenses are going to be maybe a little bit more than you think when you consider finishing your quilt, because you're either going to need to have some accessories for your machine that make it possible to machine quilt your quilt, or you're going to have to pay to send it to a long armor. You can also hand quilt, but I mean, that's a whole thing too. You need a frame or a hoop. Some people do without, but you're also going to need the thread that you want, a needle you want, a thimble, all those kinds of things. So either way, you're ready. You're ready to make a quilt. You probably have a lot of this stuff on hand. One of the things I use that I'm just remembering that I was thinking I should tell people is that by my machine, I always have a little pair of scissors sitting out, but I have little children running around through my sewing studio. And so the scissors that I have by my machine actually regularly are little like kids safety scissors, because they just have to cut thread. And I mean, it's just not worth it to me to have super sharp snips that somebody could poke their eye out or, cut their finger or their hand with. So I just have little safety scissors, and you can get started with that. I don't recommend buying vintage thread. I recommend spending money on new thread. Just because the older it gets, it can get kind of dried out and desiccated, and make it a little bit weak or easy to break, especially if it's all cotton. And you need a good quality thread going through a piece of machinery like your sewing machine. But there are a lot of ways that you can find things or borrow things or buy things at estate sales to kind of get started on your quilting journey. So just as a quick recap, let's go through everything we need. You got to find adequate space. Just treat yourself to some space in your home. A rotary cutter, I recommend a 45 millimeter. Get you a cutting mat. Have at least one dimension of at least 22 inches. That way you can get it good with the fabric cut and at least measure well. You need a cutting ruler, so that's an acrylic ruler. I like a 9x14 inch. Everybody's different. Some people prefer a full, like 24-inch ruler. You need some snips or some small scissors. You need a sewing machine if you're going to machine machine piece or machine quilt. You're going to need some pins. Cheap is just fine. You're going to need some thread. Cheap is just fine. But get two kinds of cheap thread, polyester and cotton. See what you like. See what your machine likes. You need a needle for hand stitching. That's important if you're going to hand stitch your binding down at the end. If you're going to do your own domestic quilting on your machine, you're going to need a walking foot. Just get a walking foot, or make sure your machine comes with one. If you're going to do free motion quilting, you don't necessarily need a walking foot. But I will say free motion quilting for me was way more intimidating than walking foot quilting, straight lines on my machine or on my quilt. And so I did not start free motion quilting on my domestic machine for many, many years. I don't know that I would recommend it for a beginner unless it's something you really, really want to do. Then you need to make sure you have a free motion quilting foot on your machine to use. Just use the needle on your machine at first. Just get into it slowly, baby steps. Just use plain white Elmer's glue for basting. Use spray basting spray for basting. Use curved safety pins if that's what you like. Just have some mechanism in place for basting your quilt together. Then get you a guide bar, like a seam guide bar that goes on your sewing machine. And that's really all you need to get started. I promise it is. That's a good list, actually. That'll get you through a lot of patterns out there so that you can get started, make a quilt that you want to make. Always, remember that you're never alone. The internet is full of advice, tips, tricks. And I would love to actually compile some tips and tricks from our listeners. So remember, if you're out there and you're like yelling at your speakers, like, no, what about this? They need this. You should have said this. Just send me an email, hello@patchworkrevivalstudios.com. Share your best trick, your best tool, your favorite notion. I'll share it with our listeners. And I think that's all I've got for this week. So don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, leave a review. That would mean so much to me. With that, we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here, y'all. Bye-bye. Well, that's it for this episode of Patchwork Revival. I loved having you here with me talking all things quilty. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rave review. Also, be sure to jump down to the show notes to find links for this episode, as well as the link to my shop where you can enjoy 15% off as a podcast listener with code REVIVAL. Remember that the Patchwork Revival podcast is here to celebrate the connection made in the quilts we love. I'll see you next time.